Well, now that you have considered many different ways of defining social policy and that you have looked at the aims of social policy, let's try to consider the three main ways that social policy can be understood, which are also outlined in the main textbook for this course. One of them is social policy as an output. Another one is social policy as a discipline and social policy as a process. So, social policy as an output is the first understanding which is outlined by McClelland and colleagues. And this really just looks at policy as a product. And that means the concrete decisions, laws, or regulations produced by the government or other institutions. And this can be anything like a piece of legislation or a new social service or a new program or a new regulation. So this also can entail the intentions and objective, which are meant to clarify and clarify the debates of what people want to achieve in the society. But this also can be in the forms of policy statements or even informal agreements. And also this entails really the administrative and financial arrangements, meaning the different ways in which we organize services and institutions to achieve specific goals or intentions. But also policy as an output entails also the outcomes of social policy or social administration. And this means the impacts of social policies and how different groups are treated, or even the overall quality of life and experience from public social policies. So the second understanding is social policy as a discipline or an area of study. And this understanding is just looking at how social policy seeks to understand how the organization of society affects well-being. So this also derives from the belief that we can change the society in a planned and purposeful manner and improve people's welfare using knowledge and research. So these perspectives, again, you find them in textbooks by James Midley. But also social policy as a discipline of study looks at, social policy being a very young discipline or area of study, with the first chair of social policy being established at London School of Economics in 1950 by Richard Titmuss, whom we started looking at early on in the previous recordings. So social policy as a discipline of study is also concerned with specific activities around understanding the factors that influence particular social policies, social problems, and how government responds to those social policy problems, but also the understanding of the impact of policies on people's lives and the nature of society. But also broadly, social policy as a discipline is broadly concerned with the questions of welfare, equity, and public ethics. So another consideration is that of social policy as a process, and this entails the activities that people, groups, or institutions undertake in order to introduce new policies or to change existing policies. So as a process, social policy involves a set of interrelated, iterative, and non-linear steps. And you find this, for example, when you are trying to do policy analysis, that you have to follow specific steps. And in many cases, these steps will be interrelated, but at the same time, they will not be linear. These steps also and social policy broadly as a process occurs within a range of interdependent contexts. And at times, these different dimensions in which social policy is embedded, whether the social, the economic, the political, the governmental, or even the legal and cultural context, cannot be separated. So then we might want to look in details on the understanding of social policy in particular as an attempt to solve social problems. And as we had already mentioned, policy is made in response to some sort of social problems that requires attention. So policy is exactly what the government chooses to do or not to do about that particular issue. So Legrand, who's one of the scholars we cited or who's cited in the textbook, suggests that there are three main ways in which the government intervenes to solve social problems. One of these is through cash benefits to individuals or households who are paid directly or even indirectly by government. And you see this when the government tries to pay people who are seeking jobs or through social security payments, different schemes of social security. But also the second one is providing services, what is broadly known as the social welfare. And this, of course, really involves funding or direct provision of specific services by the government. And the third way government intervenes is through regulation. This is when the government tries to implement rules or governing what individuals and organizations can or cannot do. And I think all this again speaks to the different roles or functions of social policy. So to these three main ways in which government intervenes, Fawcett added a fourth category, a fourth consideration, which is just inaction, when the government just chooses not to do anything, even when a problem has been identified, and decides not to take any decision in addressing that issue. Now, all this takes us to really thinking critically about what might be the challenges of contemporary social policy practice. Yeah, we might have mentioned it in an implicit way that people have different views about what is good policy and what is bad policy. But at the same time, people even have different views about what should be considered a social problem and what should be deserving public attention. But even there are different views in terms of what gets priority in the public debates or in how the government allocates its resources. And all these makes social policy really a terrain of, conflicting agendas. And at times you can find that if you are involved in policy making or policy analysis, you are involved in these kinds of discussions where it is very hard to even reach a consensus on what people want to be in place as policies. So policies are therefore rarely completely settled, but are frequently contested and can be revised. And again, that's one of the key roles of policy reforms. So much policy activism is therefore about improving poor policy. But again, what is regarded as poor policy will always differ because politics. Here you will hear really more of this as we move on in the semester. But again, it speaks to how policy is dynamic. So we might want to consider these few reflective questions regarding the challenges of contemporary policy, social policy practice. Can all issues be solved through social policy interventions? Whose issues can be solved or can't be solved at all? Whose values are used to determine social policy, and whose interests are often served or ignored in contemporary social policy practice? And what is even the cost, and who pays for that cost when we are trying to make social policies? So we have now reached the end of the first module. You will have noticed that social policy really resists a neat, narrow definition. But broadly speaking, it provides the framework for the welfare state, the set of institutional arrangements established to achieve citizen well-being. So the institutions most relevant to this discussion are generally categorized as the human services, and this draws a narrower focus than public policy, which is again taken to refer to all elements of government interventions. So the boundaries between, different areas of social policy and public policy remain really blurred. And again, this is something we cannot overemphasize. Thank you very much, and see you in the next module.